She drowned. My father told the judge quietly, as if it were nothing. I stared at the paper, a death certificate with my name on it. Dot. The courtroom went silent when I walked in. Dot. Very much alive. And that's when everything changed. What if your own family declared you dead? Not by accident, but with a cold, calculated plan to steal everything you had. They thought they'd buried me for good, moved my inheritance to an offshore account, and held a silent memorial. But I walked into that courtroom, not with flowers, but with evidence that would shatter their carefully constructed lie. And believe me, what happened next was a twist no one, especially not them, saw coming. It started with an envelope. Thick, heavy, the kind that makes your stomach clench before you even touch it. It slid through my mail slot, right there while I was folding warm laundry, minding my own business. My name typed across the front, and in the corner, Department of Health, Vital Records Division. I remember thinking, asterisk, huh? What could this be? Asterisk, I carried it to the kitchen counter, my heart doing a little anxious flutter. I hesitated, just for a second. That tiny pause before I slid it open with a butter knife. I remember it so clearly now. And inside, a certificate. Official. Notarized. Sealed in blue ink. And that's when I froze. Name of deceased, Lauren May Chun. Date of death, June 12, 2020. Cause of death, accidental drowning, San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. My fingers went numb. I blinked at the paper, thinking, asterisk, no way. This has to be a mistake. Another Lauren Chun, right? Another life completely unrelated to mine. Asterisk, but no. There it was, in faded gray type, just above that official seal. My full date of birth, my social security number, even my last known address from before I left Connecticut. My breath hitched. I wasn't dead. I was right here, sitting at my kitchen table, perfectly alive. I sank into the chair, the death certificate shaking in my hands. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. My fingertips felt like ice. It was like my body was trying to protect itself from a truth too horrific to absorb. For what felt like an eternity, I just sat there, trying to comprehend how someone could legally erase me. And then it clicked. San Miguel. That trip. It was supposed to be a sabbatical, a fresh start. My parents had practically insisted on it back in 2020. You need a break, Lauren, they'd said. Away from the pressure of your design work, away from all the stress you're projecting onto us. The moment I landed, my bank account was frozen. My phone conveniently stopped working 2 days in. The hotel lost my reservation. It was a whole week before I found stable internet, and by then, the silence from home was deafening. I hadn't thought about that time in years. I'd buried it deep, like we all bury things that hurt too much to face. But now, the ugly truth was printed on thick paper, stamped with a raised gold seal. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me gone. I grabbed my phone, dialing the only person I trusted enough after 3 years of silence. Julian Carter, he answered on the second ring. My voice cracked. It's me. A beat of silence. Lauren. Then it spilled out. Julian, I just received a death certificate. In my name. Filed in Vermont, dated 2020. I gripped the counter, knuckles white. Another pause. A subtle shift in his breathing. I thought you ghosted me, he finally said, his voice laced with disbelief. But you're saying they filed it themselves? I asked. My parents? Or someone acting on their behalf? Julian exhaled slowly. Okay, let's not panic. But Lauren, that's not just strange. That's serious. Like, felony level serious. I stared at the certificate again. It lists the cause of death, a place. It's not just a typo. It's deliberate. Did you keep it? He asked. Of course, I said. I haven't touched anything else. Good, he replied. Don't shred anything. Don't even bend it. I sighed. I know. He hesitated. You want to tell me everything. Or should I just come up there? I almost smiled. Almost. But the crushing weight in my chest wouldn't let it rise. Let me call you back. I need to look through the rest of the mail. I hung up and went back to the small stack on the entry table. Junk. A magazine I never subscribed to. And then, a letter from a law office in New Haven. Joseph Reed, ESQ. I almost tossed it until I saw the handwriting. It was unmistakable. A heavy, slanted script I hadn't seen since my grandfather, Calvin Dawson, passed away. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you're reading this, it means your return was not on their terms. That's good. We have work to do. Joseph. I stared at the note. It wasn't emotional, wasn't long, but it confirmed everything. What I feared, and what I desperately needed to believe, this wasn't over. And I wasn't crazy. Back in college, my father used to say, in this family, absence means silence. Don't come back unless you're ready to be obedient. I thought he was just being dramatic. Controlling. Sure, but sinister? Now I saw differently. They didn't just erase me. They had plans for what would come next. My sketch pad still sat untouched on the counter, a half-finished blazer design, hanging on the wall beside it. I used to think I had time. Time to live quietly, to build something on my own terms. But that was before someone declared me dead on paper. Now, the clock was ticking. I stood by the front door, looking down at the snow melting on the steps. The sun had broken through the clouds, just enough to warm the railings. I'm going back, I whispered. Not to reconnect, not to ask for answers, but to show them I'm still here. And this time, they won't be the ones writing the story. The first thing that hit me when I stepped into Joseph Reed's office was the smell. Old leather, aging paper, and that faint, stubborn trace of peppermint lozenges he always kept in his desk. It was exactly the same as when I'd come here as a teenager, fresh off some argument with my grandfather about college or career, or the entire shape of my life. But this time, I wasn't here for guidance. I was here for proof. Joseph looked up, adjusting his glasses, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. Lauren! His voice cracked just slightly. In the flesh, I said, stepping fully into the room. Surprise. He blinked twice, pushed back from his desk and stood. You shouldn't be here, he said, not unkindly. But thank God you are. I sat down without waiting for an invitation. The chair felt firmer than I remembered, but it still held the weight of history. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, holding his gaze. They filed a death certificate, I stated. Filed, stamped, and mailed it. I have it in my bag if you want to see. Joseph rubbed the bridge of his nose, then reached for a ceramic mug, pouring coffee from a pot that had probably been there all morning. I don't need to see it, he said, handing me the mug. I've seen the papers. I just never thought I'd see you. I took the coffee, more for the warmth than the taste, my fingers wrapping around the cup like they were searching for something solid. So it's true. He nodded. Your father filed for probate in late 2021. Claimed you had passed away abroad. No remains recovered. Said it was a tragedy no one could talk about. I nearly laughed, but it came out as a small, sharp breath. Classic Philip Chin, Joseph opened a leather folder, pulling out a thick stack of documents. This is the original trust from Calvin. Your grandfather knew things might go sideways. That's why he set this up the way he did. You are the sole heir to $6 million and the Vermont property, but only if you're alive, and only if you stay out of the family business. That part won't remember, I said quietly. He looked at me, serious now. You turned 33 in less than 3 months. If this isn't reversed by then, the entire estate defaults to the family trust. Controlled by my father and Derek. I finished for him, the words tasting bitter. Joseph nodded. My fingers brushed against the edge of my coat pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, an old sketch I tucked away years ago during a layover. It was a design for a silk blazer, hand-stitched edges, a bold collar, something I dreamed of including in my portfolio. The corners were wrinkled now, stained with ink, a tiny coffee ring on it. I just held it for a second, then slipped it back. There was a soft knock. Joseph opened the door. A man stepped in, tall but slouched, with tired eyes and a messenger bag clutched to his chest. Kent Wallace, he said, offering a faint nod. Kent used to do the books for Walker Holdings, Joseph explained. He left after. Well, I'll let him explain. Kent sat beside me, not quite meeting my eyes. He pulled a small flash drive from his bag, then a second, then a third. These contained payroll records, tax filings, consulting contracts, and shell company invoices going back 5 years. I stared at the pile. That's a lot of data. He gave a humorless smile. Your brother and your father never expected anyone to come looking. Especially not you. I was dead, I said flatly. He nodded. They needed you dead because they couldn't control you alive. Silence hung heavy. Then I reached for the drives, slipping them into my bag. Ken cleared his throat. There's something else. The money. It's been moving slowly, quietly, into a company called Calderon Equity. On paper, it's a development firm. In reality, it's a funnel. For what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Risky overseas investments. Some legal, some questionable. Joseph looked at me. You can't go public. Not yet. But you can't stay quiet either. I nodded slowly. So, we build quietly. Document everything. And wait. For what? Ken asked. For them to make a mistake, I said. Joseph leaned back. That might not take long. I stood, gathering the papers Joseph had spread out, careful not to bend a single one. Then I turned towards the door. 90 days, I said, glancing back at them. That's how long I have. To do what? Ken asked. To come back from the dead, I replied. And as I stepped out into the cool New Haven air, I finished the thought silently, and take back what's mine. I didn't plan to make an entrance. But apparently, when someone legally dead walks into a courthouse, people notice. The rain had turned the marble steps of the Fairfield County Courthouse into a slick mirror. I could see my reflection with each step. My black coat clinging, my hair pulled back tight, my eyes fixed forward like I'd already made it through the worst. Joseph held an umbrella over us, walking half a step behind, while Julian followed quietly, scanning the crowd. This was supposed to be a simple filing. Walk in, hand over the motion, walk out. But the moment I stepped inside, the lobby froze. A clerk dropped his pen. Another looked up from her computer and mouthed something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. Within seconds, phones were lifted. Someone whispered, "That's her." And just like that, the rumors started flying. Asterisk the daughter they declared dead. The missing heir. The girl who came back. Asterisk I didn't flinch. I kept walking. Room 402 was down the main hallway, past portraits of retired judges and the faint scent of wet wool and old carpet. The hallway buzzed with low voices. Reporters were there for some corporate fraud case, but their lenses had pivoted. I could feel it. As we approached the courtroom, I saw them. Philip Chun stood by the double doors, speaking to Derek in that stiff, clipped tone I remembered so well, strategic and cold. Derek paced like a cornered animal, hands flexing at his sides. My mother, Margaret, stood a few feet away, her trench coat dry, pearl earrings perfectly in place. She stared straight ahead. She'd always been good at stillness. Emily stood beside her, pale, eyes darting, clutching a file folder like it was her only lifeline. Philip saw me first. His mouth flattened into a hard line. Derek muttered something. And my mother? She simply turned, blinked, and said my name once. Lauren. Not, "Oh my God, you're alive." Just, Lauren. I moved past them, walking up to the clerk's desk inside the courtroom. The clerk looked from me to Joseph, unsure if he should even speak. "I'm here to file a motion," I said, my voice clear and steady. "To revoke a death certificate issued in error and to reinstate my legal identity." Joseph handed over the documents with practiced ease. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and thick-rimmed glasses, adjusted her chair. "This is unusual," she said, flipping through the papers, "but not unprecedented." "No, Your Honor," Joseph replied. "The petitioner has documentation verifying she is alive and was incorrectly declared deceased. We have her government-issued ID, medical records from Vermont General, and a notarized letter from myself, dated 2020, confirming Calvin Dawson's intent to transfer assets to her." The judge raised an eyebrow. "This letter was never entered into probate because it was intercepted," Joseph said calmly. "Allegedly." Derek cut in, stepping forward. "Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to derail a legitimate family process." I turned to him. "Legitimate process?" I echoed, my voice dangerously low. "You tried to bury me with paperwork and a lie." He scoffed. "You disappeared for years. What were we supposed to think?" "You didn't think," I shot back. "You planned." The judge held up a hand. "Enough. This court will not descend into family theatrics." She looked at me. "Miss Chen, until we verify your identity through appropriate legal and forensic channels, This matter is postponed. You will return in 30 days. The motion is recorded. All parties will be notified of next steps. I nodded. Understood. The judge stood. The bailiff called for recess. The room stirred. As I gathered my things, I turned one last time towards my family. You buried me with a signature, I said, meeting each of their eyes. I'm here to show you how I dig myself out. Philip didn't respond. His jaw tightened, hands folded behind his back like this was a board meeting, not his daughter reclaiming her life. Margaret offered nothing but a blink. Emily looked down. But Derek leaned in towards our father as we exited. I caught the words, barely. Asterisk she once wore. Let's give her one. Asterisk outside. The rain had turned into a mist, soft against my face as I walked past the gathering reporters. One stepped in front of me, notepad ready. How does it feel to be resurrected? I didn't answer. I just kept walking. Because I wasn't back to feel anything. I was back to finish what they tried to end. And if they couldn't keep me dead, they'd try to prove I was insane, subtle, elegant, legally bulletproof. Just like them. The next envelope was hand-delivered, cream-colored, thick, embossed with the seal of the Connecticut Probate Court. It arrived mid-morning, just as Joseph and I were mapping out a financial timeline. I barely had time for coffee. Inside, a summons. Petition for emergency conservatorship of adult individual Lauren May Chun. Grounds. Ongoing delusional behavior, erratic claims, inability to manage financial affairs. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just folded the letter once, then once more, and laid it on the dining table. The rental I'd been staying in, an Airbnb tucked behind a florist shop in Stamford, had become my war room. Files covered every surface. Printouts, legal pads, medical receipts, flash drives, labeled envelopes. The window was cracked, letting in the cool April air. The trees outside had just started budding, pale green tips trembling in the breeze. Julian arrived half an hour later. He didn't need to knock. He let himself in, holding 2 paper coffee cups. I brought real caffeine, he said. Then he saw the summons. Damn! They're going to say I'm unstable, I said, my voice eerily calm. They filed the motion yesterday. He sat down, slid 1 coffee toward me, and took a deep breath. Let me guess. They're going to use Mexico. I nodded. Back in 2020, during my so-called sabbatical, I'd spent 3 nights in a private clinic outside San Miguel. Heat stroke, exhaustion, and a panic attack after losing my passport. I hadn't talked about it much. My parents had paid the bill quietly, and when I came home, it was as if it never happened. But I knew they hadn't forgotten. They'll say it was psychiatric, I stated. Not dehydration. Not stress. Just instability. Julian leaned back. We'll need medical records. The originals. I can pull a request through my channels. I glanced toward the bedroom. My suitcase was still half unpacked. I hadn't even bothered with drawers. Everything about my life felt temporary. Joseph arrived an hour later, papers in hand. We're going to need a statement from the clinic itself. Originals, translated, signed, notarized. I've already called, Julian said. They'll send them by courier. The doorbell rang again, just after noon. This time it was Emily. She looked smaller somehow. Her hair was pinned up the way our mother liked it, neat, polished, but her face held none of that composure. She clutched a manila envelope to her chest like it might shield her. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, stepping inside. I said nothing, just gestured to a chair. They're planning to submit reports, she continued, her voice barely audible. Psych evals from a doctor in Massachusetts. Except he's never treated you. I stared at her. I overheard Dad talking to Bernard, something about needing preemptive documentation in case she got too loud. Julian narrowed his eyes. What's the doctor's name? Dr. Alan Neri. Joseph turned to his bag, flipped open his briefcase, and began typing on a small tablet. He's real, he muttered. But we'll need to confirm if he's part of this. Emily placed the envelope on the table. I found this in Dad's home office. It's a draft of the affidavit they're planning to submit. Lauren's signature is on page 4. I didn't move. Emily opened the file and turned it toward me. There it was. My name, my date of birth, a signature I hadn't written. Below it, the chilling claim. Subject displays persistent paranoia, fixation on unsubstantiated conspiracy, and emotional volatility. They're not just trying to discredit me, I said, the realization dawning. They're trying to erase my credibility altogether. Joseph nodded. And if the court buys it, they can control everything. Julian looked up. No judge is going to grant conservatorship without due process. But that's not the point, is it? They just want to plant doubt. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the old fridge and the rustling of papers in the breeze. They want to make me look like the problem, I whispered. Julian leaned forward. Then we fight smart. I'll go see Bernard. What? I said. Not officially, but he'll understand what we have. He knows me. He'll know what I'm capable of doing with it. That evening, Julian met Bernard in a parking garage beneath an office complex in Norwalk. He didn't take a recorder. Didn't need one. Just his voice. If she goes down, Julian said, his tone unwavering, we all go public. Every file, every transaction, every email. Can't be found. We're ready. Bernard, ever composed, adjusted his tie. You're bluffing. Julian smiled faintly. Try me. When Julian returned that night, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table. Lights dimmed, my coat still on. The affidavit lay in front of me, lit only by a desk lamp. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. Back when I was 12, my mother had said, women who get too loud get institutionalized. She was only half joking then. Now, here I was, reading proof that the punchline had become a strategy. I glanced at my phone. A message from Kent had just come in. Found it. Email thread from Bernard to Philip. Subject line, Phase 2. Preemptive discredit. It's real. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the affidavit. They're betting on silence, I whispered. Then louder, to myself this time. Let's give them noise instead. When I started digging, I didn't expect to find pieces of myself forged into someone else's empire. It was a gray Thursday morning when the message came through. No name, just a string of numbers and one line of text. Archive 9. Top floor, metal cabinet C, walk-in storage. I didn't need to ask who sent it. That burner number had popped up once before, 3 days after Emily slipped me the psychiatric affidavit. Her silence spoke louder than guilt. She couldn't stand next to me in court, but she wasn't standing with them either. That afternoon, Julian drove. Ken sat in the back, laptop balanced on his knees, typing out backup files and flagging timestamps. The ride to Bridgeport was mostly quiet. The wind howled against the windows like a warning, but none of us said it aloud. The storage building wasn't marked, just an old, half-faded Walker Holdings logo above the side entrance. The paint peeled in long curls, and the door creaked like a bad movie prop when Julian pushed it open. Inside smelled like wet cardboard and printer toner. The air was thick cold. Rows of metal shelves lined the space, broken only by dusty filing cabinets and monitors that hadn't blinked to life in a decade. Ken pulled out a flashlight. Top floor, I said. The stairwell groaned under our weight. Every step felt like walking into a trap. My gloves, thin leather, charcoal gray, tightened slightly at the wrists. I hadn't taken them off since this began. Armor of a different kind. We reached the 3rd floor, where broken fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. At the back, half concealed behind a pile of collapsed banker boxes, was Cabinet C. Julian opened it slowly. 5th drawer down, a red file folder with a single black label. Archive 9. Client risk reports. Inside, the paper was crisp. The ink dark. Contracts, letters, even passport scans, all with my name, all with my signature. But I had never signed them. Archangel funding. Full repayment due by Q3, 2023. Borrower, Lauren May Chin. Amount, $2,800,000. Terms, accelerated. Jurisdiction, Cayman Islands. Below it, a scanned signature identical to mine in every curve. A forged passport scan was stapled to the back. Photo almost perfect, except for the expiration date. It had been fabricated. This looked like a routine international financing deal, but I'd never even heard of Archangel funding. Ken let out a low whistle. They're good, he muttered. Real good. He flipped through the folder, pulling out 3 more documents. Shell company ownership, You're listed as primary signatory on a series of transfers made to something called Legacy Recovery LLC. I shook my head. Never heard of it. He held up his phone. Because it doesn't exist, at least not legally. But the transfers are real. Julian leaned over Kent's shoulder. Show me the trail. Kent turned the laptop. Funds moved from Walker Holdings' internal development budget, masked as consultant fees, routed through Legacy Recovery, then wired offshore. Here. He pointed. A bank in the Cayman Islands. Active account registered under an umbrella firm tied to an address in the British Virgin Islands. I felt sick to my stomach. This isn't just fraud, Julian said quietly. This is federal-level money laundering, with forged identity layered on top. And if I hadn't found this? I asked. They'd have blamed you, Kent said. Written you off as unstable or complicit. Or both. My phone buzzed. A message from Joseph. Injunction filed. Judge approved temporary freeze on all outgoing asset transfers. You've bought time. Use it. Julian nodded towards me. We need to move. I took the entire folder and slid it into a hard-shell envelope. Ken copied the files onto 3 separate flash drives, each labeled and sealed. One for the Attorney General's office, one for Joseph, one for safekeeping. We didn't speak on the way down the stairs. There was something sacred in that silence when the truth finally had weight. Outside, the clouds had begun to break, slanting sun across the pavement like gold lines on wet stone. Julian stepped aside to make a call. I heard only parts of it. His name, credentials, the words immediate concern. Federal level, identity forgery. When he hung up, his face was unreadable. They just escalated it, he said. Case is moving to federal review. SEC, IRS, FBI. It's not just about the money anymore. I nodded, clutching the folder against my chest. The wind whipped against my coat, but I barely felt it. That night, back at the Airbnb, I spread the documents across the table. Legal ink and deceit arranged in perfect rows. These weren't just numbers or signatures. They were choices, pieces of me copied and twisted into a structure I never consented to, built by people who claimed to love me. I sat there until the sun went down, until the edges of the papers blurred into the shadows. Then my phone buzzed again. A known number. They know you found it. Be careful. I stared at the screen. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew they were right. I walked into that courthouse, not to reclaim an inheritance, but to reclaim my name. The courtroom was cooler than I expected, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above the wooden pews. Outside, maple leaves glowed amber in the late November sun, scattering across the steps like golden confetti. But inside, there was no celebration. Just tension. Quiet. Brittle. Coiled like a hell breath. I sat between Joseph and Julian at the plaintiff's table. Across from us, my family. Philip, with his polished shoes and unreadable eyes. Margaret, arms folded tight, lips a shade too pale. Derek tapping his knee, head lowered like a boxer waiting for the bell. Emily sat alone in the gallery, a small, solitary figure. The judge entered, and the room rose. The case was called Chun v. Chun et al., and the fire began. The prosecution moved first, laying out the timeline. The falsified death certificate, the psychiatric evaluations from a doctor who had never met me, the offshore wire transfers in my name, the Archangel funding contract signed with a forged passport scan. One by one, the pieces landed, each sharper than the last. Kent testified first. His voice was flat, careful. He explained the shell companies, the consultant invoices, the email chains labeled Phase 2. He showed the financial trail, precise and undeniable. Then Emily was called. She stepped forward, a piece of paper in her hand, a crack in her voice. I was part of it, she said. At first, I thought it was just a way to manage the situation, but I knew. I knew what they were doing. She turned to me. Lauren, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner. I didn't nod, didn't smile, just let her words land where they would. Bernard, what next? They showed him the payment logs, the messages between him and my father. His voice faltered. He folded right there on the stand, said he'd take a deal if he could avoid prison time. Said Philip orchestrated it. Said Margaret looked the other way. Derek stood abruptly, slamming his palm on the defense table. This is a circus, he yelled. The judge didn't blink. Mr. Chun, you're excused from the courtroom. 2 officers walked him out. Then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the witness stand. The room seemed smaller from that height. Closer. I looked at each person. My father, my mother, the judge, the press, the strangers behind the glass. And I spoke. I didn't die, I said. I disappeared. I disappeared because I believed distance would protect me. I disappeared because the silence was safer than their version of love. I paused, but I came back. Not for money, not for status, but because I won't let them rewrite the story. What I rebuilt in that silence, my integrity, my peace, matters more than anything they tried to steal. The judge listened. Everyone did. The verdict came swiftly. My legal identity was reinstated. The estate was frozen pending federal investigation. Philip and Bernard would be tried separately under criminal charges. Margaret was named a passive beneficiary, not a participant, but her reputation unraveled all the same. The courtroom emptied slowly. Emily reached out to touch my arm. I didn't pull away, but I didn't linger either. 6 months later, I opened the doors to the Dawson Initiative, a nonprofit focused on victims of financial abuse, particularly those harmed by family systems cloaked in prestige and secrecy. We started with 1 room, just a few desks, soft lighting, a coffee machine, and a wall of corkboard covered in sticky notes that read like small declarations. I'm not crazy. They don't get to decide who I am. Silence is not safety. The day we hosted our first community workshop, a package arrived. No return address, wrapped carefully in soft paper. Inside was a sketch. My old one, the silk blazer, the lines a little faded now, the corners curled, and a tiny coffee stain. And a note. You were always meant to lead. Mom. I stood there, holding it for a long time. I didn't cry. Some wounds don't bleed. They just change you. That night, I pulled out a new sketch pad. Not for fashion. For something different. I drew the blueprint for a women's resource center, shelter, job training, legal aid all in one. I labeled the rooms with names like Clarity, Anchor, and Rise. Because rebuilding isn't about going back. It's about choosing to build forward with your name, your voice, and your truth intact. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't standing up to strangers. It's standing up to the people who once called you family. In walking back into that courtroom, I didn't seek revenge. I sought restoration of truth, of identity, and of self-worth. Because when we speak up, especially after being silenced, we give others the courage to do the same. And maybe that's how healing begins, not by erasing the past, but by choosing who we become in spite of it. What a journey, right? It makes you wonder, what would you do if you found out your own family had erased you? Have you ever had to fight for your truth against someone you loved? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories and your take on mine.